President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021, and he actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us. And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. The opposite happened.
The Russian massing of troops on the Ukrainian border came in the context of a demand for a negotiation on European security architecture and reassurances to Moscow that weaponry would not be placed in Ukraine on its border. And it's clear that if Ukraine were to have been brought into NATO, such weaponry would have been placed. In fact, Ukraine for 8 years had been trained, reorganized, re-equipped to NATO standards by the United States and other countries. And this was a concern to Russia. The response of the United States was to a blunt refusal to entertain any discussion of European security architecture. This meant that there was no path, that negotiations, a no negotiated path for the Russians to achieve what they regarded as a fundamental national security goal, and that is freedom from hostile presence on their border.
There was Russian troops, as you may remember, up to February, massing on the Ukrainian border, and they eventually invaded. That was the news on this side of the border. On the other side of the border, there were 60,000 Ukrainian troops who were massing on the line of contact right across Donbass. Now, Donbass, as far as the Russians are concerned, is the last stepping stone. You're close by Russia. You have a strategic advantage over Russia.
Unprovoked active aggression.
Unjustified and unprovoked.
Russia's unjustified and unprovoked attack.
Unprovoked and unjustifiable.
Unprovoked and unjustified aggression.
Unprovoked invasion of Ukraine.
Unprovoked and unjustified attack.
Unprovoked. It is unwarranted.
Brutal invasion. Unprovoked.
Unprovoked attack on their country.
Unprovoked military invasion.
Peace on our continent has been shattered. We now have war in Europe.
The inevitable and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine.
But this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
Est-ce le début d'une vraie discussion de sortie de crise? Il est évidemment trop tôt pour le dire, mais les négociateurs russes sont arrivés à Istanbul pour y rencontrer demain leurs homologues ukrainiens. Un échange qui intervient alors que le président ukrainien Volodymyr Zelensky a fait plusieurs ouvertures sur le renoncement à l'OTAN, sur la neutralité et même sur la souveraineté du Donbass et de la Crimée. Écoutez.
Je comprends qu'il est impossible de forcer complètement la Russie à quitter le territoire ukrainien. Cela conduirait à la Troisième Guerre mondiale. Je le comprends et c'est pourquoi je parle d'un compromis. Retournez là où tout a commencé et ensuite nous essaierons de résoudre le problème du Donbass, la question compliquée du Donbass. Concernant les garanties de sécurité, de neutralité et de statut non nucléaire de notre État, nous sommes prêts à y aller. C'est le point le plus important. C'était le point principal pour la Fédération de Russie, aussi loin que je me souvienne. Et si je me souviens bien, c'est pour ça qu'ils ont commencé la guerre.
This neutrality agreement was basically already tabled, and then Johnson kind of spoiled it. So I don't understand why neutrality didn't become the solution. And by now, my answer is because the neocons in NATO didn't want it.
Because Russia's goal was not to colonize Ukraine. They could not have colonized Ukraine with the forces that they sent in.
40,000. They sent in like 40,000.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. The whole point
Ukraine is the second largest army in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. The whole point was to basically coerce Ukraine into going to the negotiating table to accept the terms that it had previously pretty much agreed to, especially with the Minsk Accords, but refused to implement. That was the goal of Russia's invasion. And that's why you had peace talks from the start.
Щоб ми взяли нейтралітет. Це було найбільше для них справа, щоб вони готові були закінчити війну, якщо ми візьмемо, як Фінляндія колись там, нейтралітет і дамо зобов'язання, що ми не будемо вступати до НАТО.
Тільки один пункт.
Ну, фактично, ключовий пункт був цей. Все інше там косметичні політичні приправки, типу про денацифікацію, російськомовне населення і бла-бла-бла.
Чому Україна не погодилася на цей пункт?
Ну, по-перше, для того, щоб на цей пункт погодитись, треба змінювати Конституцію. Наш шлях до НАТО записаний в Конституції.
In April 2022, both U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin traveled to Ukraine just weeks after a peace deal fell through and admitted that the U.S. was all in on winning the current fight in Ukraine. What they meant by this was that the U.S. was fully committed to corralling its own military arsenal and that of its NATO partners in a proxy war against Russia to the last Ukrainian.
What would happen if there was a full-scale nuclear war between Russia and the United States? Each impact creates a fireball about as hot as the core of the sun, followed by a radioactive mushroom cloud. These intense explosions vaporize people nearby and cause fires and blindness further away. But the explosions, the electromagnetic pulse, and the radioactivity aren't the worst part. Nuclear winter is.
There won't be peace, in Europe at least, until there is nothing left but a crater. So once again, Davy Crockett's for Ukraine. They got those quadrocopters now. We can probably carry a Davy Crockett.
Well, 4 of them probably can, yes. Can someone do a quick Google how much Davy Crockett weighs?
It's a WZ-58 warhead, I think.
Okay, no, not. It will take a bigger drone.
If we're looking for a new fundraiser, that's the one.
Yep. So hashtag Davy Crockett's for Ukraine. Make it happen, people.
Or if not Davy Crockett's for Ukraine, assault rifles for Dagestan.
Singing the song of angry men. It is the music of the people who will not be slaves again.
My humble opinion, this is very much like what Ronald Reagan did back in the 80s. He believed in supporting freedom fighters. He did it in Latin America. He did it in Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique. He did it in Afghanistan. Those people were willing, as the Ukrainian people are, to use their blood and our bullets.
Ukraine is simply a pawn in this. But the object, as the US Defense Secretary is, and I paraphrase him, is to destroy the Russian Federation.
People ask me, is it worth it? Here's what we've gotten for our investment. We haven't lost one soldier. We reduced the combat power of the Russian army by 50%, and not one of us has died in that endeavor. This is a great deal for America.
When America arms Ukraine, we get a lot for a little. Putin is an enemy of America. We've used 5% of our defense budget to arm Ukraine, and with it, they've destroyed 50% of Putin's army.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, I believe if you can defeat a strategic adversary not using any U.S. troops, you're at the acme of professionalism, because letting the Ukrainians defeat that, it takes a strategic adversary off the table, and then we can focus where we should be focusing against our primary adversary, which is China at this time.
We've done all this by sending weapons from storage, not our troops. The more Ukraine weakens Russia, the more it also weakens Russia's closest ally, China.
Free or die.
Free or die.
Now we are free.
Yes.
And we will be.
And the Russians are down.
It's the best money we've ever spent. Thank you so much.
Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see?
But I think we should send it all to Singapore
because they are doing more than any of us to destroy as many Russians as possible. And us at Frontline Kitchen, of course, support that. So, another thing auctioned off for Zigaspor. I'll let this magical man himself do the accounting because I'm not good at that.
So this is a video that's been put out by an agency or a company called signmyrocket.com. So basically, this is an organization that is encouraging people to donate to the Ukrainian forces, and the more they pay, the larger the missile that their message will be written on, and that will be then fired at the Russian forces.
Courtesy of signmyrocket.com, which fundraises for the Ukrainian military by writing custom messages on artillery shells, missiles, and even MiG-29 fighter jets for donations.
Now, on their front page, you'll notice if you come down the familiar language, you have a chance to kill orcs. So that tells us immediately what kind of tone is being set by all of these kind of organizations that have been established as part of this crowdfunding industry.
The Christmas present to my family for the holiday, I had it says, go fuck yourselves from the Petersons.
Which is, according to George Eliasson, who's an independent journalist who's been in the Donbass since before 2014, this has actually been going on since 2014.
Join in the fight and we'll give you the right to be free. Do you hear the people singing the song of angry men?
Yeah, explain to people what kill orcs means. I mean, it's obviously a reference to Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Well, I mean, the orcs are the monsters from Mordor, you know, the inhuman beasts.
This has led to some bizarre, funny, and overall fascinating messages being sent by this death-dealing postman from every corner of the globe, resulting in over $1.4 million raised. I wanted to get to the bottom of these funny bombs, so I traveled to central Ukraine.
So it's very clear what they are saying, and this dehumanization of Russian forces and Russian people has been ongoing since 2014.
Russia is ready to negotiate. That's the line from its president Vladimir Putin in an interview to a state-run news channel. But he says that Kyiv has refused to sit down and discuss a ceasefire.
If we want a negotiated peaceful solution to the war in Ukraine, we need to provide military support to Ukraine. That's the only way. Weapons, they are the way to peace.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken refuted calls for a quick ceasefire.
On Friday, China released a position paper, a 12-point document which, among other things, calls for a resumption of peace talks. The paper also calls for an end to unilateral sanctions and resolution to the humanitarian crisis. It also says nuclear weapons should not be used and nuclear wars must not be fought.
And President Biden has rejected a new 12-point peace plan.
The U.S. is warning about China's so-called peace plan for the war in Ukraine.
That if, coming out of this meeting, there's some sort of call for a ceasefire, well, that's just going to be unacceptable.
Well, let's start, Gulliver, with this African delegation, this self-proclaimed peacekeeping mission. What's going on there?
During those talks between the African leaders and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv yesterday, Zelensky shot down any attempt at peace without the complete withdrawal of Russian troops from his country.
Унеможливлювати застосування Росією ядерної зброї. Але, що важливо, я ще раз звертаюсь до міжнародної спільноти. Як це було до 24-го? Превентивні удари, щоб вони знали, що з ними буде, якщо вони застосують, а не навпаки.
With burnout tanks and Russia's forces in disarray. He thought he'd get the Finlandization of NATO Instead, he got the NATOization of Finland and Sweden. It's a dream for those Ukrainian patriots who fought for years against Russia's aggressions in the Donbass. Freedom. Freedom. There is no sweeter word than freedom. There is no nobler goal than freedom. There's no higher aspiration than freedom.
'Cause you light up the power. I don't care, go on and tear me apart. You hear the people sing, singing the song of angry men.
We could not be prouder that he is joining us today from Ukraine, where he is leading the struggle to keep his country free and Europe safe. Welcome, President Zelensky, to Johns Hopkins.
Today, the uncivilized East is a barbaric Moscow. Neither Ukraine nor any Eastern European country is a brother nation, inverted commas, of Russia. Volodymyr Zelensky is the most outstanding leader on an international scale in the 21st century. Russia is anti-Europe. The war is a manifestation of the eternal conflict between good and evil.
Ukraine is the story of a future victory and a chance for you to invest now in projects worth of hundreds of billions of dollars.
It is already clear that this will be the largest economic project of our time in Europe. It is obvious that American business can become the locomotive that will once again push forward global economic growth. We have already managed to attract attention and have cooperation with such giants of the international financial and investment world as BlackRock, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. Such American brands as Starlink or Westinghouse have already become part of our Ukrainian way. Your brilliant defense systems, such as HIMARS or Bradleys, are already uniting our history of freedom with your enterprises. We are waiting for Patriot. We are looking closely at Abrams. Thousands of such examples are possible, and everyone can become a big business by working with Ukraine in all sectors, from weapons and defense to construction, from communication to agriculture, from transport to IT, from banks to medicine. And I believe that freedom must always win.
And it's not about rebuilding the old Ukraine, it's about building a better Ukraine. And I do believe, emotionally, those who truly believe in the capitalistic system will be flooding Ukraine with capital. And I'm not talking about philanthropy. There's going to be a lot of philanthropy. I'm truly talking about if we can rebuild Ukraine, it could be a beacon to the rest of the world of the power of capitalism.
I'm going to
Tell Putin to get the fuck out of Ukraine.
say that again.
Tell Putin to get the fuck out of Ukraine. That's what I said. That's what I said.
DIA in DC, a first-hand look at Ukraine's award-winning e-government achievements and the enduring impact of the U.S.-Ukraine tech partnership.
Digital government is critically important moving forward.
Our main task is to protect the people. After the invasion, DIA acted reactively. We quickly introduced a new set of services vital in extreme situations. Evacuation document. combines all personal info in one digital doc, and accelerates identification at checkpoints. War Bonds, aimed at rebuilding the liberated and soon-to-be deoccupied Ukrainian cities. E-Enemy, a chatbot that helps any citizen safely transfer info about the location of Russian troops, names of collaborators, and enemy movements to the armed forces. Even when the world is falling apart, our main task is to protect the people.
Imagine that nearly everything that you need from your government you can get with simple taps on your phone or browser, which we have been working with the Ukrainian government, UK Aid, and the Eurasia Foundation to build since the year 2016. We started this work on digitizing government back then. Then, in 2019, President Zelensky and then Minister Fedorov laid out a vision to do something far more ambitious, to create the state in a smartphone. In January of this year, I announced that USAID would support partner countries that are inspired by DIA and want to accelerate their own digital transformation.
Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing?
And I've covered probably 7, 8, 9 shooting wars. I've never seen a coverage so utterly consumed by a tsunami of jingoism.
From a farm in England, 2,000 miles across Europe, to the front line. Slava Ukraini. It starts with people like Nick.
I really don't know how I got into being an arms dealer.
Yes, you must remember, though, that above all, this is a war of propaganda.
There has been an information war of formidable character. Apparently, some people in the West believe that if you can win the information war, you win the war on the ground.
But this is not the only aspect of Star Wars that we are putting into practice. We will defeat the Empire too.
I think this is the first war in the developed world that is a smartphone war. When you think of the effectiveness of getting a message shared,
we need to use next generation technologies. We need to make it feel like he's more in the room.
Building new Ukraine together, free, brave, and digital. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Like, at the end of the day, it's not the memes, it's not the humor, it's the supporting Ukraine. The goal is to, as Pete said, unalive Russians and to keep Ukrainians alive.
If a poll says that we support Army Ukraine to its fullest and it goes up by 20 percentage points. I mean, they're like sharks, where's the sharky there? Yeah. They smell blood, and that's polls, and they start responding, last month I said maybe not arm Ukraine, but now I think we should arm them.
Countering disinformation it's difficult to encapsulate, like, how to do it. If you can tell someone, no, your point is stupid, I'm not going to bother researching it, I'm not going to do the homework for you, you're stupid, your point is stupid, and you're correct, like, there's nothing to, like, what do you do to that?
I mean, anyone with a functioning brain and access to Google can refute them themselves.
It's time to wrap this part of the event up. It's been, I was going to say it's been crazy, but you're NAFO or NAFO, so everything is crazy. So it's been normal.
My very good friend and fellow reporter, Wyatt Reed, yesterday was in Donetsk, and he was leaving a restaurant and going back to his hotel. And in between the restaurant and his hotel was an artillery strike. What military purpose does an artillery strike have in that location? Absolutely none. He's been there for less than 24 hours, and in the course of his time being there, his less than 1 day in Donetsk, he was nearly killed himself.
And they started in 2014 when they failing to defeat the so-called pro-Russian separatists militarily. They resorted to shelling civilians in the hope of dampening the civilian population's will and support for the local authorities there. So it started happening in 2014, famously when Ukrainian jet bombed the center of Luhansk. Horrific scenes, I mentioned that in the documentary. And it's been going on intermittently over the last 8, going on 9 years now. And since Russia sent its troops into Ukraine, it's escalated.
When this damage occurred, I had just, by chance, I had gone to the toilet at the very moment that this occurred. If I'd been here, I don't know, I'd probably be shredded with glass. And then there was another one or two, I can't remember now, it's all kind of hazy, but I would not put it past them to also target this hotel intentionally. It is known that many journalists stay here, and of course by targeting journalists, Ukraine can keep people from documenting its war crimes, which are manifold.
You hear the distant drums, it is the future that they bring when tomorrow comes.
There has been some difficulty getting through to some countries of the global south who still have a lot of, they have influence, right? But it seems that they are not very, let's say, on the same page with us. So is this also a part of the reckoning of some of the colonialism as well, or are there other reasons as well?
The spaces that were there for journalists who might be called, let's say, mavericks. That is, they made an effort to tell the truth. They went against the grain. Those spaces have been closed.
We've seen the BBC, CNN, ITV, Channel 4, The Times, The Telegraph, The Guardian producing identical reports from, that they say are from the ground, but mainly they're from Lviv and Kiev.
Anyone who says, brings up the history of the past 8 years is a Russian apologist, Putin's stooge.
I'm almost the only Western journalist here in Russian-held Ukraine. There's a few other fantastic independent journalists who are here on and off. But mainstream reporters don't come here because they would have no choice but simply to report the truth. They can't lie that much. And the truth is that Ukraine has been bombing civilians here for the last 8 years. And the vast majority of people here support Russia.
Those who are close to reporting the truth, people like Eva Bartlett, who's doing some fantastic work in the Donbass at the moment, reporting on the war crimes that are being committed there, the use of these cluster munitions, banned cluster munitions, petrol bombs. And she's been placed on a kill list, the Peacemakers kill list.
And what was really dangerous is that Mirotvorets wrote and accused journalists of being terrorist accomplices, of aiding terrorists. And when they published this information, they said, we don't know what's going to happen. We're saying these people are terrorist accomplices. We're putting their contact information out there, but we're leaving it up to you to take action.
The main goal of Mirotvorets is to create a situation where there are no independent journalists in Ukraine.
Last year, Oles Buzina, a Ukrainian journalist known for his pro-Russia stance, had his details leaked by Mirotvorets. Just 48 hours later, he was shot and killed outside his home in Kiev.
These children's profiles include their photographs, their phone numbers, their home addresses, and information about their families. One of those children is Faina Savankova, a 13-year-old from the Lugansk Republic.
She made a video approach. She recorded a video to the UN that the war in Ukraine must be over, the war on Donbass, because for the past 8 years there were Ukrainians bombing Donbass. And she said that the war must be over and children has a right to the peaceful life. And after that, she was included on Mirotvorets.
Actively promoting violence against children on this site. So it's an important story. I contacted the website as part of my story for Press TV, asking for a statement. They didn't give me a statement, they just put me on the list.
That we uncovered a similar kill list that is operating from an office in London and close to Hyde Park. It's Molfar, its name is. It's linked to the Ukrainian government, their digital transformation ministry. The head of PR from MOLFAR was joined them from Ukraine's Foreign Affairs Ministry, and it's of course supported by USAID and Pinkerton. It lists as one of its clients the notorious US anti-working class, anti-trade union intelligence agency, and they've been publishing lists of undesirables.
A German journalist now reporting from the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine, and she is now being prosecuted by the German government and faces 3 years in prison for her reporting, which has violated new German speech laws.
For example, they mentioned, I was saying the 24th of February that Russia started the special operation, and I said, well, the people here are celebrating this decision because they got killed already 8 years by Ukrainians. So
right.
And for the Germans, it's not understandable. They say it's not true, and this is radical to say such a thing.
On June 2nd, 2023, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken gave a speech in Helsinki where he stated that military support for Ukraine must be prioritized over diplomacy. The U.S. is the biggest arms exporter in the world, comprising around 40% of all global arms sales.
Poured across Ukraine's border, kicking off the Russian invasion in late February, something else was happening at the same time in New York. The stock prices climbing to their highest point in years.
War is good business for parts of the economy.
With 800 plus foreign military bases, 11 command structures, and a public military budget of nearly $1 trillion US.
We don't apologize for making these systems, making these weapons.
NATO countries have already provided $40 billion in weapons to Ukraine over the span of this conflict, and we have witnessed these weapons become heavier, deadlier, and more provocative, stymieing the possibility of a negotiated settlement to this conflict. The U.S. approved of sending cluster munitions to Ukraine last month, the same munitions that continue to kill and explode on civilians in Laos decades after the U.S. invasion there, and which have long been condemned by over 100 countries worldwide.
Once the conflict has been resolved and we have a peace settlement, it comes to, one of the big questions is what happens to those Javelin missiles and all the other arms, the billions of dollars and billions of pounds, millions of pounds in arms that have found their way into the hands of not just the fascist and neo-Nazi forces, but some of those which have also found their way onto the black market.
Congress has failed to ensure these shady payments and massive arms deals are properly tracked. In fact, much of the military and humanitarian aid shipped to Ukraine has simply vanished. Last year, CBS News quoted the director of a pro-Zelensky nonprofit in Ukraine who reported that only 30% of aid was reaching the front lines.
En redes sociales se dieron a conocer videos donde se muestran a personas supuestamente pertenecientes al cártel del Golfo portando armas y equipamiento que pocas veces se ha visto.
Un video publicado en redes sociales muestra a una persona portando un Javelin durante un retén en Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Se trata de un lanzagranadas de grado militar ampliamente utilizado en la invasión de Ucrania.
Last June, the head of Interpol warned that the massive transfers of arms into Ukraine means, quote, we can expect an influx of weapons in Europe and beyond.
Ce qu'on déplore seulement, c'est que des armes destinées à l'Ukraine se retrouvent sur notre continent et continuent à activer le fait de notre guerre. Les terroristes, ils payent les équipements partout, surtout dans les zones de conflit, parce qu'il y a des trafiquants d'armes.
Many of these weapons have landed on the black market to drug cartels, criminal organizations.
U.S. officials acknowledge that there is a possibility that at the close of this conflict, some of this free flow of arms could wind up on the black market.
Стільки зброї не тому, що ми хороші, як нам кажуть, нам допомагає Захід, ніхто готовий їх виконувати, бо нам весело, нам прикольно убивати і прикольно воювати. Тому що ми затіяли війну, якої не було вже останніх 60 років. На європейському континенті найбільше. Тільки в Британії там, здається, більше. Ви розумієте, цей потенціал цих збройних сил, це стане проблемою зразу для всіх, хто зараз нам десь там намагається робити хенькі уколи.
Former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, James Stavridis, acknowledged last May that analysts were correct to assume that Ukraine is burning through a year's worth of U.S. production monthly.
As a Ukrainian soldier complained This month to Vice News, we don't know what Zelensky's plans are, but, quote, it looks like the extermination of its own population, like of the combat-ready and working-age population. That's it. Indeed, military cemeteries in Ukraine are expanding almost as rapidly as the Northern Virginia McMansions and beachfront estates of executives from Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and assorted Beltway contractors benefiting from the second highest level of military spending since World War II. These are the real winners of the Ukraine proxy war, not average Ukrainians or Americans or Russians. The winners, or Europeans for that matter, the winners are people like Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who spent his time between the Obama and Biden administrations launching a consulting firm called West Exec Advisors, which secured lucrative government contracts for intelligence firms in the arms industry. Blinken's former partners at West Exec include Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, CIA Deputy Director David Cohen, former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and almost a dozen current and former members of Biden's national security team. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, for his part, is a former and possibly future board member of Raytheon, and an ex-partner of Pine Island Capital Investment, which collaborates with West Exec and which Blinken himself has advised. Meanwhile, the current U.S. ambassador to this body, the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, is listed as a senior counsel at the Albright Stonebridge Group, a self-described commercial diplomacy firm that also finesses government contracts for the intelligence and arms sector, and which was founded by Madeleine Albright, infamously known for her comments that the deaths by sanctions of 500,000 Iraqi children were worth it. So while military-age Ukrainian men are ripped off the streets by military police and sent to the front lines, the financially and politically connected architects of this proxy war are planning to walk through the revolving door to reap unimaginable profits once their time in the Biden administration is over. For them, a negotiated settlement to this territorial dispute means an end to the cash cow of close to $150 billion in U.S. aid to Ukraine. So in closing, when the United States, my country, a permanent member of this council, has fallen under the control of a bipartisan regime which seeks to perpetuate a proxy war for as long as it takes, in the words of Joe Biden, which considers diplomacy synonymous with unilateral coercive measures to, quote, turn the ruble to rubble, as Biden pledged to do, whose leadership subverts negotiations in order to pursue profit while refusing to properly inform its own citizens what they're paying for, and pushes the sons and brothers of its supposed Ukrainian partners out onto a killing field in order to bludgeon a geopolitical rival.
This is Henry Keane on UATV English, breaking hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Marking the Independence Day of Ukraine, a burnt enemy military equipment is placed on Krещатик Square in the heart of the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. Krещатик will receive parade of Russian military scrap, the one that failed to reach Kiev on its own in 3 days' war and was carried here by the Ukrainian army, roasted along the way.
I think when you think about TikTok, this is how billions of people all over the world are receiving news for the first time about the war, especially Gen Z. On the positive side, right, it can be used for good. Even just yesterday, the White House brought 30 top TikTokers together to just arm them with the right information about what is happening, how the U.S. is thinking about politics, and what they should be talking about on their platforms. And on the flip side, you know, there's obviously misinformation being spread on the platform. And I think TikTok is doing the best they can to mitigate that in many ways, such as, you know, I think users in Russia, for example, today, they can't live stream, they can't post on TikTok. So there's no one right way to do it. But I do think making sure that you're arming TikTok creators with the right information is a great start.
When both Zelensky and members of U.S. Congress are calling for preemptive strikes on Russia, which have nothing to do with Article 51 of the UN Charter, this Council must take action to enforce that charter. That charter is clear that the Security Council must use its authority to guarantee a pacific settlement of dispute, particularly when it threatens international security. That should not only apply to Russia and Ukraine. This Council has an obligation to strictly monitor and restrain the U.S. and the illegal military formation known as NATO. Thank you.
Russia has issued a strong warning against the supply of depleted uranium weapons to the Ukrainian military, amid concerns that a wide range of Western tanks and armored vehicles set to be delivered to the country are designed specifically to use such munitions.
Last April, there was a deal on the table which would have seen Russia withdraw in return for Ukrainian non-NATO membership, but Ukraine's Western friends killer clown Boris Johnson and NATO rocked into town and told them to keep fighting. Because the more arms you pump into Ukraine, the more the war will be prolonged, the more Ukrainians will die. And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
Grazie. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm afraid, Mrs. Daly, we've given you the opportunity to reply. So let us try and stay calm so that we can continue the debate.
And I have never, in all my long life, seen a war where there's been so little effort made to end it. So much so, I am beginning, he said mildly, to suspect that there might be some people who want it to be a long war.
Yeah. It does look like that at times, doesn't it?
The Economist's senior editors in London and Kyiv discuss how Ukrainians are preparing for the war to last for years.
Ukrainians have recognized that this is going to be a long war. This has become a new normal. I think Ukrainians actually don't like now talking about the timelines. There's almost a irritation with people saying, when is it going to end? It will end when Ukrainian victory comes. It's an existential war. The economy, the people, and particularly the mindset has to adjust to that.
Increasingly, I worry about the difficulty of selling this. The message was this counteroffensive's coming, but there isn't a story out there about how this war is going to be won. And it's a very difficult message to sell. We think there's not going to be much progress, but we're still supporting you. Let's lower expectations here, but this is still a worthy fight. I think it's important that leaders of Ukraine's allies start to reframe this fight and say what it's about, because the narrative has got left behind.
I mean, I imagine the hawks inside the Biden administration, which pretty much all of them, I'm not even sure if any doves exist anymore. I think they just want a frozen conflict where nothing gets resolved, and you have basically Ukraine turned into this permanent Israel, constantly at war and constantly being used as an outpost of U.S. hegemony.
There is now an open conflict within the U.S. foreign policy establishment over whether Ukraine and arming Ukraine to maximum effect is a good idea, or whether other military matters deserve more attention, with a leaked memo from top Air Force brass claiming that the U.S. must prepare to go to war with China by 2025.
Ma soprattutto è cambiato il contesto umano. L'esercito russo, che veniva salutato come esercito occupante a Kiev e a Kharkov, qui viene salutato come esercito liberatore, perché gran parte della popolazione parla il russo, si sente vicina al russo e saluta l'arrivo dei russi e delle truppe indipendentiste che li appoggiano.
No, ma aspetta,
e quindi
Gian, scusami, non facciamo passare le cose che per scontate per te, ma non per tutti noi e per i telespettatori. Non ho ben capito cosa hai detto, anzi l'ho ben capito, tu mi stai dicendo che la popolazione non lo vede come un'invasione lì dove sei tu?
Assolutamente no, perché qui nel Donbass gran parte della popolazione è filorussa, hanno combattuto per 8 anni, dal 2014, dalla parte russa e hanno combattuto contro l'Ucraina. E quindi sostanzialmente la condizione è molto cambiata.
Time for Truth or Fake. Catalina's limbering up by the big board. And today, some users on Twitter claiming that the United States is responsible for the Nord Stream pipeline leak. Ursula von der Leyen, of course, is calling it sabotage. Russia has a different view. Truth or fake then, Catalina? Tell us.
We're going to be in Ukraine today because the commander-in-chief of the armed forces there has published a photo of himself, and he appears to be wearing a bracelet with a swastika on it. Tell us a bit more. I'm joined by James Creedon. Hi there, James. Now let's begin with some images circulating online that seem to show Nazi symbols in Ukraine, but these images have been shared out of context, I gather.
Claims about Nazis in Ukraine are a mix of falsehoods and distortions. For a start, Ukrainians are not being held hostage by Nazis.
In recent weeks, the right sector has been involved in firefights with Ukrainian security forces, a signal from a strong militia to a weak government. Don't cross us.
Neo-Nazis and the far right do not play the role in Ukraine that Russia falsely describes. They didn't in 2014, they don't now.
But it's clear that it was the radical groups who kept up the pressure on Viktor Yanukovych, and many of them feel that this really is their victory. But the most organised and perhaps the most effective were a small number of far-right groups. When it came to confrontations with the police, it was often the nationalists who were the loudest and the most violent. Just as it did during Maidan, the right sector has played a key role in the fighting in the east. Groups of armed men strut through the square with dubious iconography. That yellow armband is a Volksangel, a German symbol used by several SS divisions during the Second World War.
It's a pagan symbol known as Wolf's Angel, and a version of it was used by some SS units in Nazi Germany. Andreas Umland's an expert on Ukrainian nationalism. He's looked at this, writing, "The Wolf's Angel has far-right connotations, but it's not considered a fascist symbol by the population in Ukraine." Neo-Nazis and the far right do not play the role in Ukraine that Russia falsely describes. They didn't in 2014, they don't now.